All of you who might be watching online, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. So glad you've been able to join us too. Now, we're going to be talking about personalised medicine or precision medicine. To many people, they mean one and the same thing, but can I just start with a definition? So what we're talking about is not just about genomics, which is often what people think about when they talk about precision medicine, but we're talking about personalised medicine in its widest sense, right from whole genome sequencing and diagnosis of rare disease down to very personalised care that's not genomics under the tree level. And what we want to find out today is how genomic medicine, or which is now mainstream, or how personalised medicine, which we've seen principally operating in oncology and cancer, how we can make personalised medicine both accessible and affordable to everyone. And I want to introduce what I think, ladies and gentlemen, is an absolutely stellar panel. So can I introduce, first of all, Victor Dzau, President of the US National Academy of Medicine. Then we have Vivian Tan. Vivian is Vice President of Strategy and Transformation at Kaiser Permanente in the US. And you are our provider. You're speaking on the behalf of hospitals who have to commission these services and use them. Then we have Jeroen, who's Chief Innovation and Strategy Officer at Philips, and you're our IT and tech strategy person. Then we have Gianluca Pettiti from Thermo in China, and you are representing, I guess, the tech side, the devices. And finally, we have Carl-Henrik Heldin. Kalle is the Professor of Molecular Cell Biology at Uppsala, and he's an oncologist. So oncology has really been perfecting precision medicine for quite some time now. And that's, I suppose, where people most have the idea about precision medicine. And perhaps that's why they also think that it's going to be very expensive, because they automatically think of expensive cancer medicines. But let's start with you, Victor. Where do you think we can make precision medicine affordable and accessible?
Sure. If I may, I'm going to read you a definition which the National Academy has put forward in 2010. Called Towards Precision Medicine, a new taxonomy. It says, the tailoring of medical treatment to individual characteristics of each patient, classify individuals into subpopulations that differ in their susceptibility to particular disease or response to treatment. Prevention can then be concentrated on those who benefit, sparing expense, side effect of those who will not. Yes, so I come from national academies, and we have 3 academies: science, engineering, medicine. And we've been in this field for quite a while, being the first in 1988 to point out the need to map and sequence the human genome, which was not supported by everyone. But now, of course, you can do this for less than $1,000.
We think you're very far-sighted now.
Thank you. So I have been involved with this area for a while, particularly through the World Economic Forum. And I've been very interested in seeing how you realize the potential of precision medicine. Cost always comes up. Complexity, cost, and also inequity are the 3 things that come up frequently. And of course, patients, ownership, privacy, etc. Let's talk about cost. My feeling is, if precision medicine is properly implemented, you should reduce cost by reducing testing, diagnostic testing to begin with. You get one test that can tell you what is needed. You don't have to have redundancy. And in fact, if it's can tell you to prescribe medicine, you don't have to go through trial and error to reduce the harm. So we have recently done a report that looked at how frequently that you actually have diagnostic error. Surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, in the United States, 5% of adults experience a diagnostic error every year. That's 12 million individuals. And it can be harmful some of the times. So you can see the argument for precision medicine. So what's the concern? The drugs are too expensive. the cancer drugs in particular. And the argument here is, what's it worth to you to save a life versus how much you want to pay, right? But I think most of us would agree that the rise of healthcare costs is unsustainable. So if you're going to introduce any innovation, it has to meet some litmus test to say it's better than what you have, and the outcomes are better, and it's affordable. Hence the big debate about cost in precision medicine. If you look at cancer therapy, for example, in 2001, 2011 in the United States, 55% expenditures on oncology treatment have been increased just in treating cancer drugs, monoclonal antibodies, immunotherapy, etc. So the question to me is not so much cost, but cost effectiveness. In other words, can you measure that whatever you're introducing is worth the cost, and therefore the outcomes over the cost itself, the value? Right? I don't think we put out so far new drugs to that test. So take, for example, cancer treatment. A prostate cancer treatment called Provenge is $93,000 per treatment and extends life by 4 months. Hepatitis C drugs, Sovaldi and others, about the same cost, arguably is extending life or reducing cirrhosis, liver cancer, transplantation, and so they price the same way, and yet I would argue the outcomes are going to be very different.
And indeed, there's a paper published very recently showing that actually mortality rates are not affected.
Yes.
Which is extraordinary.
Yeah.
Can we move on now to you, Vivian?
So can I make one point? So I think there's need to be cost-effective analysis in all the innovations that's brought to bear. You know, how do we know one is better than the other, and is it worth the cost? So I'm not arguing that one shouldn't increase costs. I'm saying that you need to meet the litmus test of cost-effective, which means you need to include economic analysis into this. One last point, if I may. Diagnostics. Diagnostics which can predict precisely who's going to get diabetes can be tremendous savings. And yet in today's reimbursement environment in our country, it's cost-based, not value-based. So a lot of people are discouraged from actually developing those diagnostic tests because it's very difficult to develop and to market and to recover the cost. So we have a misaligned system altogether that needs to be discussed.
Okay, so Vivian, you will probably have a great clamour from people wanting to have this precision medicine, particularly in cancer, but rather more broadly, what does Kaiser Permanente feel about precision medicine? Is it something that you want to introduce? Is it cost effective for you?
You know, we don't have the option not to deal with it, because our patients are coming in and bringing their 23andMe profile with them and having done a lot of research on the internet and, you know, having conversations in the clinical or physician room. So I think we have to embrace it. I want to build off a really important point Dr. Dzau made, which was around really understanding the comparative effectiveness of different therapies. We actually have a Center for Comparative Effectiveness within Kaiser, and it is this set of researchers that actually look at the efficacy, both short-term and long-term, and really help inform our thinking around it. We are also thinking through some of the very practical issues around how to operationalize precision medicine in ways that will manage costs and affordability. One very good example is we have 300 genetics counselors in Kaiser Permanente. I don't think you can hire enough counselors to actually meet the needs of members and patients. And so the question is, how do we actually leverage our existing very talented physician workforce of 22 or 21,000 and think about training and education that needs to come with that, so that they can actually meet member needs and also be effective and affordable at the same time.
Kalle, of course, you in that lead field of oncology, and actually our conversation has been about oncology so far. Is it possible that to make precision medicine cost-effective in cancer?
I think this is a key question. Let me start by saying that precision medicine is of utmost importance, particularly in oncology. And I think what has happened during the last years has given us much more tools in order to provide precision medicine for patients. We all know that cancer is not one disease. It's not even cancer from a specific organ is one disease, and not even a specific subtype of cancer from a specific organ is one disease. They all are individuals, and we need to find the individual treatment which is suitable to kill this particular tumor. And this is for the benefit of the patient to start with, to increase the chance of treatment, to decrease the side effects. But it is also in the interest of costs, because if we can choose the right medicine, given that they are very expensive, and avoid to give them to patients who do not benefit from them, of course we will in the end save costs. I should also say that precision medicine in oncology is a lot about genomics, sequencing of DNA. But this is not all of it. There is also epigenomics, metabolomics, imaging, and to combine all this with the life history of the patient. Taking this all together will give us the opportunity to provide better treatment. The sequencing of DNA is what is most discussed. And of course, this should be done. And now it can be done at a rather low cost. So in that particular context, cost is not a big issue anymore because it has become really cheap. But upon sequencing of the tumor DNA, people sometimes find mutations in genes that are druggable. And then you can select the best drug to treat that particular patient. But sometimes there is no treatment for this particular mutation, like the most mutated genes, P53 and the HRAS, KRAS. There is no treatment anymore, but that will come, I'm sure. So this is only a matter of time and input into research. And eventually this will be, we will have tools for that too. But in many cases, there is no driver mutations that you can pinpoint. And the reasons for the tumor must be something else, epigenetics, for instance. So we need to take the whole picture into account in order to provide the best treatment for patients.
As I should have mentioned at the start, of course, all of this is all your fault because you discovered some of the major druggable targets that we're now looking for. So thank you. That's all his fault for precision medicine. Let me come to you now, Jeroen, because we were talking about precision medicine really simply about in terms of oncology, but it's much broader than that.
Yeah. So I want to pick up on what you said. It's really understanding what drives the disease, but I think it's also what drives health. And that's more than a clinical condition. I think behavior plays a huge part. Your understanding of your own health plays a huge part. So I think you were talking about, you know, the epigenetics, the biome, your genomics, you know, all of these are part of the picture. So if we really start talking about precision medicine, I think precision is much bigger than that. And there's another complexity. You can take a snapshot in time, but we're emerging complex systems. So things will change. So it's very hard to become really precise about what drives. But we can know much more today than we could even 2 or 3 years ago. So I can see a genomic test going to $100 pretty soon and being widely available. Then if I look what we're doing, we're believing that really having a much better understanding of the patient and combining that of much more knowledge about the potential treatment and the choice of therapy will allow us to make the next step. So we're not going to make a huge leap, we're going to make it step by step. So how do we do that? By just combining information. You know, if you start combining what you see on images, already today, if we look at the tumor, if we can see and quantify how a tumor metastasizes, how it grows, whether cells are dead or alive. If we then can pinpoint what are the parts that we should take the tissue, that we look at the tissue, we take out the tissue, we start using what we're doing with digital pathology and interpreting the cell structure. And we use objective measures to look at that. So again, we quantify it, we identify quantifiable biomarkers, and then we say, hey, these are the 15 cell groups that seem to drive the cancer. We can then take the genomics. Then we have part of the picture. Maybe, as you said, we don't have the full picture, but we're already way more accurate. So our aim is to if you do a test, to see much more, to interpret an image, analyze the image, find the biomarkers, aggregate that information, pathology, EMR, contextual information, look for the profiles of patients that have done and experienced similar, and use that to risk stratify and then make the right decision about therapy, which I personally believe is a personal decision. But so it's really, to us, how can we bring more information together? How can we look at what the impact is of that information on risk stratification, use what the impact is of that information for an oncologist like you to be better informed in your decision making, and how can we create the closed loop in this? Because it's all emerging. So we want to learn with every interaction. We want to learn with every consult and procedure you do. We want to learn from what you're doing in Kaiser and aggregate that and bring that back to the point of care. And I think that's the opportunity we see. And we're not going to solve all of this. It's going to move on and on and on. But we're going to be way more precise in the diagnosis. We're going to be way more informed in what therapies probably will give the best outcomes.
Now, Gianluca, I am failing in an attempt to drag them all away from oncology. So, so bring us back to testing and diagnostics that are not in the oncology sphere in precision medicine.
Sure. If you think at China, for example, China is a country that has a very fast growth ahead, and obviously looking at sustainable growth, inclusive growth as one of the themes of the World Economic Forum, but it also has a big challenge in terms of diagnostic. China today spends approximately close to 6% of GDP in healthcare. If you do the math on $11 trillion GDP with 1.4 billion people, it's about 460. Trust me, I did the math before.
It's quite a lot.
$460 a year per capita in China. If you do the same math in the US, it's close to $10,000, 20 times. So how do you reconcile the investments that are needed to bring the healthcare ecosystem in China to the same level of some of the other countries, and technology? So what we believe is that technology needs to bring that level of efficiency and that level of precision, if you wish. It's not perfection, but precision that is required to drive more efficiency in the system. And eventually, and Victor pointed out a very important concept, that is value-based care. It could be that some diagnostic tests are more expensive, even if the cost is going down. Right. But if the overall outcome is better, the overall economics of the equation, it makes sense. And so that's how countries like China will need to look at technology and adopt technology in order to drive a sustainable development in healthcare. And this goes for infectious disease. We had really good discussion this morning about microbial resistance is a big challenge. And there's a lot that can be done with novel technologies, digital technologies, big data, the way that we use that in order to be more efficient in tackling some of these diseases.
And this is under what's called under the trees technology. So this is very cheap and very inclusive, where you have a handheld device, you have basically you spit in the box. I'm exaggerating, but you spit in the box and you can tell immediately, for instance, where somebody has a resistant form of TB or a non-resistant form. And actually that's incredibly important and useful technology at a very cheap price.
Yeah, and I would say the underlying technology to run the diagnostic is as important as the data management part of it. This is crucial. And I think from a regulatory standpoint, we're going to ask ourselves, what is the right regulatory pathway in order to enable a healthy data sharing environment? And I think, Genomic England, for example, you know it very well, has been very active in that space with crowdfunding models in order to drive more science and eventually influence regulation. So I think there's different aspects of the ecosystem that needs to come together in order to drive more sustainable healthcare. Technology is one of these. I can talk about technology, but I think Victor pointed out earlier the importance of the value-based care concept.
So I should declare my interest at this point, and I'm Head of Public Engagement at Genomics England, which is delivering the 100,000 Genomes project for the UK government. And what Gianluca is talking about is a thing we have called Panel App, and where it's crowdsourced and globally to get the variants involved in particular rare diseases. And what happens is that we have an automatic pipeline, and once something is discovered, it goes straight back into the pipeline so that we can make our pipeline faster and more accurate every time. But we've come up, you've mentioned something else that's a real problem in this area, which is regulation. And whether or which point we regulate. Do we regulate the software? Do we regulate the device? Do we regulate the whole pipeline, which is what we're attempting to do in the UK? It's very, very difficult. And the other area that you mentioned, which I think will possibly halt this whole thing and actually make it impossible for everyone, is the data issue. Because at the moment, if all the public can see are hugely priced medicines from precision medicine, and that their data is being used to, they perceive, as enrich pharmaceutical companies, there is not going to be a lot of confidence in personalized medicine. Victor?
If I may, I would love to get into the data of things. I don't think we should leave the cost issue yet.
Oh, no,
and you're saying about regulation.
Don't worry, I'm coming back to cost.
Here's the way I look at it. How do you actually judge how much would you like to spend to improve quality of life and extend life, right? We don't know that answer. But what I do know is that when you look at the rise in the health costs, is crowding out the investment in education and many others, right?
We can't go on spending
as
much
right.
as we do.
So you do have to look at, is it worth the cost effectiveness? And when you think along that pathway, I do think the question you're asking about who has the responsibility is the issue. Now, in our country, the problem is that we have many short-term decisions being made. So, for example, taking diagnostics. When you see the savings 10 years from now, because you can precisely identify diabetes and prevent it, that 10 years later, current insurance payers are not interested in that because people move from one place to the other. Whereas possibly a single system, payer system, could be looking at savings later, willing to invest more upfront, right? So that's a fundamental issue we need to, I still argue.
Call it the other pockets problem.
That's right, exactly. So I still argue at the very core, at the beginning, you have to ask the question, when you have a new innovation, show me at least that you have assessed the economic analysis over a period of time. Then the question is, how do you prove it? Certainly not within the way we do things now. Or if you look at precision medicine, small populations of studies, subpopulations. So I think that regulatory agencies should come up with this idea of a provisional approval. That is to say, let's rapidly track them, approve it, but then what you have to do is show me in post-marketing big data, collection of information to show that you actually, the economic impact and outer impact over time. So the idea of contingency versus a longer term proof by using big data, cost effectiveness of the drug, after which you can either remove it or you can continue it. I think that's a new way of looking at regulatory framework.
But is not the quick win, perhaps, for personalized medicine in pharmacogenomics? So pharmacogenomics, for those of you who are not aware of it, is where you're using genomic testing to see whether people will be affected by one particular drug or another, because 70% of the way that we metabolize medicines is genetically determined. And actually, you can have some very quick wins there, because you can immediately find out whether, for instance, well, the one that's in use already is abacavir, which is an HIV drug. But if we could prove the benefit immediately of that, then I think that helps us to lay the foundations for precision medicine. Is that the case for you, Vivian?
We have the unique situation where we are both an integrated system, and we've been around for 70 years. We have members who are generational. Our members, if you are a commercial member, stays with us on average for 10 years. And once you graduate into Medicare, which is our seniors program, it's another 20. So we really are able to take the art of the long view. We are willing to invest in prevention because we know that our members will stay with us. I think that's unique, and we actually, I think to build on Victor's point, we've got to make sure that the rest of the system that's a little bit more fragmented can actually think that way, can actually have the art of the long view. And I like the idea of actually going after therapies that have a much shorter payback period too, because you want to start with things that clearly show value in a very short period of time and build off that.
And the other advantage of pharmacogenomics for as someone who works in public engagement, is that the public get it straight away.
Yeah.
They get the idea that if they use some sort of precision medicine test, that they can tell immediately that actually they metabolize codeine way too quickly to get any relief from the normal dose of headache. And if you're in the audience, probably about 10% of you will be one of those fast metabolizers of codeine. So when your wives or your husbands say to you, "You're such a wimp," there you are, you've taken painkillers and you're still moaning about your headache. It could well be because you're one of those fast metabolizers of codeine. But we need to know those things, and people get them, and they're important.
So I want to pick up on both what you said. I think Kaiser is in a unique position because they already are outcome-based. So they drive for optimizing the care they provide to provide better outcome to their members. There is no payer provider, there's one. Yeah. And I think the first step we have to take is measure on outcomes. And then you can prove that, for instance, that genomic tests create better outcomes at a lower cost. Yes. And the system will organize behind it. Now, what I really like what Victor said, once you start doing it and you start aggregating that information, getting back to your point, you're creating a knowledge base that you can actually make active, and you can do actually live clinical trials. So I like the idea of professional approvals. Mm-hmm. Once you start understanding many more factors, because if you think about clinical trials today are almost lab trials. You abstract from a whole bunch of factors, and now you have actually real life, and you can continue to fine tune, because I think passing an approval is actually only the first step, So I think we got to rethink that, but we can only do that if we do what you said, We got to be able to open up the data in a secure way, under permission. And once we do that, which you can do within your system, and that's why everybody loves Kaiser, because they can do it in their system, and they can literally provide better care, and they're still not happy about it. They think they can do way better. But I think you can see that a system like that, where you say we use the knowledge of our patient base to constantly improve the outcomes. And if we find something, if we find that a DNA test, create better outcomes, and it's actually even, when it's $100 test, is even way cheaper. It avoids a lot of complications downstream, or it avoids interventions downstream. Of course, we'll go for it.
Yes. So, for instance, routine genomic testing prior to surgery to make sure you're not one of those with a rare variant that will have an adverse impact of surgery.
It's actually generating data in clinical practice,
Yeah.
right? Using the great big data analytics.
Exactly.
Beyond the randomized control trial.
Yeah.
I think that's what's in the future.
But Kalle, I was going to say to you that, of course, we're talking about these very high prices for cancer medicines, but the great joy of precision medicine is that actually you can do very, very small trials, because you don't need to do 10,000. You can do 400 because it's exquisitely precise. So shouldn't that mean that drugs should be an awful lot cheaper?
You're absolutely right. So the major reason for the high costs for drugs in oncology in particular is the clinical trials. The research the pharma industry has to do is not so expensive. The cost lies with the clinical trials. And that is because now they have to incorporate many patients, and each patient costs a lot. As a consequence of precision medicine, it will be possible in the future to much better select the patients who have a good chance of responding to the drug. And that is related both to the character of the tumor, but also, as you pointed out, how the individual metabolizes the drug himself or herself. Because some of us do that better than others, and that affects the dose that should be given. So this should put a pressure on the price in the future. Another thing that could put some pressure on the price is that after 20 years, the patent ends, and then generally the price drops tenfold to make drugs much more available for everyone. That hasn't happened with Gleevec, who just went out of this 20-year
So Gleevec
period.
is the drug that was developed for
Yes, exactly.
chronic myeloid leukemia.
This is the first sort of precision drug. It's a kinase inhibitor that can be used against chronic myeloid leukemia with a big success. And I don't know why the price didn't drop. It should have done so, and if that happens, we will have available these drugs. I mean, anyone can step in now and make the drug and sell it. And I wonder why they don't do that. Another point that could also be of interest here is that when people have systematically taken tumor cells from patients and exposed them to drugs of all kinds, there are unexpected vulnerabilities with the very old, cheap drugs that are used for non-oncology purposes. So, and in many cases of these old drugs, one doesn't really know what is the target in the cell that they hit. So there is certainly a possibility in the future to find ways of treating cancer patients more cheaper than today.
And that's the other bit of precision medicine which we haven't really explored yet, the fact that you can repurpose existing, really quite cheap drugs. And we're finding that at Genomics England. We're finding actually that, well, some of the things that we found out is that some poor people have got 2 rare diseases, not 1. And that actually, when we do discover the variant, a novel new treatment opens up, but with an existing medicine. But I just want to go back to the whole return to the data thing, because we're talking about accessibility, and there is a big problem in terms of accessibility, because if you don't get all of a population into your data set, then you will become disadvantaged, and inequalities may potentially widen with precision medicine. We have an issue in the UK with, particularly with Afro-Caribbean origin men who are very, very suspicious of becoming part of the 100,000 Genomes Project. But yet if they're not in it, there is no one to compare them with, and they are being compared with data of people who are not like them. So inequalities can potentially widen with precision medicine unless we make the case for minorities to be included and take part as well.
Well, data is king. I mean, you need that information. I think for precision medicine to be realized, you have to have access to integrated data of large data sets, particularly if you think about doing it every day, not just for cancer, decisions being made. So data infrastructure, standards, everybody should be measuring comparable stuff, data sharing, right? This is a big issue, whether in fact people are willing to share data. I see Marty Murphy there. There's a thing called Project Datasphere, which is sharing data in cancer treatment patients. And so all these things have to be in place for it to be fully realized. And of course, as you said, data privacy and ownership. I think there's a lot to be discussed. I don't want to dominate this. I want others to chime in, but there are lots of issues.
And when you come to data privacy and the cost of drugs, the two collide in a really unhelpful way, because if people feel that they are providing data and yet it's the pharmaceutical companies who are benefiting.
But I think I would strongly support what Victor says. I mean, precision medicine in oncology, at least, will not work unless we have a way of sharing data. And we have to take into consideration, of course, the integrity of the patients. That goes without saying. But we have to find ways of sharing anonymized data worldwide, not sort of even within countries. I mean, worldwide.
So and how
we found out that
that's your field.
Yeah, so we found out that a lot of patients are actually willing to share their data for research, willing to share.
But it's patients.
Patients.
It's patients.
Yeah.
So it's not the public, and it's the. Let's be clear here. Patients and public have very, very different attitudes to sharing data.
So that's I'm regularly in privacy discussions. So I think privacy is a very personal thing. You know, you're either willing to share your data or not. So you have the right to share the data and give the permission. Most people, as I said, are willing to share their data if they know it's secure and anonymized. Now, if we have your DNA code, it's a little bit harder to anonymize it, but that's another discussion. Exactly. But I think we can create the safeguards that data will be secure. If we can create these longitudinal records that not only look at clinical things, but also at contextual information, behavioral information, I think we will be able to provide way better care, and we will be able to intervene at the right time, at the right place, and that's what we're not doing today. So I think a lot of people will see the interest in sharing that data. So I think what we need to do is safeguard that the privacy rights are being honored, and we need to find ways to make sure that we can interpret the data in the same way. But I come from the financial services industry, and 20 years ago, the financial services industry figured out by themselves, without any government, how to create a global payment system where anywhere here you can pay with your card or your phone in China, and it will authorize you in your bank in London or New York or San Francisco or Amsterdam. So I think we should be able to do something similar for healthcare data. I think we should be able to create an environment in which we can aggregate the data, protect the data, but make it available to research and personal care.
Can I disagree with what you said before?
Of course.
I don't think there's a fundamental difference between patient and public. I think public is sharing way more data than patient every day.
But not in...
But
I'm going to
the
disagree
reason
with him.
why is the incentive that they get with the transformational tool that has been introduced 10 years ago and has transformed life for everybody in this room. And I would say the reason we discussed it yesterday in one of the panel, it's not only about the incentive, carrot and stick, is past concept, is how do you make a healthcare concept and bring it down to processable information for the general public so they understand the value that they will get in exchange of sharing information in a secure environment. I think that's incredibly important. When we think at the ecosystem, patients and general public needs to be included, and I think education as well is incredibly important. We have a cloud system at Thermo Fisher Scientific, and everybody that we talk with, if they are patients or public, they are asking, can we have access to the data? And can we get information that are actionable and helpful? And we deal with businesses, so the answer is no at the minute. But I think it's something that is very important to say.
There's something very important here about patient-held data in which the person authorizes the sharing of their data. And by the way, I hate the use of the word sharing, because sharing to me says, you're passing around a box of chocolates and everybody's, having a go. It doesn't sound secure at all. But I wonder, I do disagree with you about, I think the public are different. And yes, we share our information with Google because they get us from A to B, and we use their map and we accept that that's part of the deal. But remember that the public in general, particularly the younger members of the public, think they're immortal and that they're never going to be sick.
So I think you're so right. Trust is the issue.
Yeah.
And I don't think we totally gain trust from everyone in this area, right? No. And particularly if you mentioned Jamaicans, I think. Is that what you said? Yeah. I mean, we have the same issue in this country in our big study called All of Us, or the Precision Medicine Initiative. particularly enrolling underserved population, to be sure that we gain the trust. I think trust is going to be an issue. For example, there's not even clarity at this point who owns the data. Right? So if you are in a research study, guess what? You sign informed consent, and presumably the research organization owns your data. But if you're in a clinical care environment, you can argue either the health system, a hospital, or yourself own the data. I think we need to get clear on data governance and trust to know how we actually create the right framework to be able to share this data. So I agree with you. There's a lot of work to be done.
But it's amazing that actually in most of the legislation, it's not clear who owns the data.
That's right.
You know, if I go to the hospital and I do an MR or blood test, do I own the data, or do I have permission to look at that data? Can I have that data and then share it with somebody else? There's no clarity, and I think that's required, at least that we know about ownership, about granting access to use that data, and that's maybe different than sharing, is granting access for certain well-defined purposes.
We say at Genomics England that you own your data. It's yours. You can take it away at any time, but we look after it and guard it with our lives, and in that sense, it's our
you have to
data.
ask the patient if you're going to use it in Genomics England.
So if they
You're
want
looking
to,
after it. I'm the custodian.
Yeah, we're the custodians, and if you want to have your data back, you can have your data back.
Are you a benevolent custodian, or are you going to use it in such a way without asking me?
No, I'm always benevolent, of course. No. We lay out very clearly, and we have participants involved. In fact, we have a participant panel, and if your genome is in it, you can be on it, and if you're not, you can't be involved. And they are the people who are part of who gets access to the data. But I'll take a question you for Callie, but audience, prepare yourselves for questions.
He's ready.
I think this all comes down to trust.
Yeah.
And I'm from a Scandinavian country. We have personal numbers. You can track any information about me easily if you have the access
But
code.
even salaries are public in Sweden. So.
And you don't have curtains. You don't do curtains at your windows either.
No, that's the Dutch.
Everything is
it's
public.
the Dutch.
That's the Dutch. Don't mix the Dutch and the Swedes.
Right. Make your point, because there's a gentleman bursting with a question
if you
here.
live in a country where you feel secure, then you would be willing to participate in this. If you live in a country where you don't trust the authorities, you're much less inclined to join these kind of efforts. And I guess we are now in a time when trust is not sort of very high in many countries. So this is a big problem. And I think if we can restore trust to authorities, I think we will also be able to conduct precision medicine easier.
And can I advertise to the people here that there is a Trust in Healthcare session immediately after this one? Let's take some questions. There's somebody behind me. You can fight between yourselves. Yeah, for the microphone.
Well,
you're next.
Okay. Andrew Thompson, I'm the founder and chief executive of Proteus Digital Health, a digital healthcare company. So I agree with all these comments about trust. I think they're incredibly important. I think it's the basic currency of how you build any market. I think trust begins with the language we use, and I'm going to refer to this comment about the public. Just that phrase is a way to undermine trust, in my view, because you refer to people in a way that I think is not respectful. I don't think it allows people to feel included. It makes people feel like they're impersonal. And so I think the language here, and I think in particular the language the British government has used, for example, to get data out of the NHS, has been the reason why people are so reticent. And I think we need to be very clear and very simple about the ownership of data. It belongs to the consumer. And just imagine if you went to a bank and Wells Fargo said, oh, no, you can't have your financial information. It now belongs to us. People would be utterly outraged. So these things are very simple in my view. They start with language, and they start with being extremely respectful to individual consumers.
Thank you.
Totally agree.
My name is Marty Murphy. I'm representing the CEO Roundtable on Cancer. One major initiative of that entity is Project Datasphere, and thank you, Victor, for acknowledging. Just 2 points regarding Project Datasphere. One is outcomes, but the other is accessibility. We talk about sharing of data, and that's a word that is being used and perhaps discussed, but really what I'm advocating is an open access. Of course, responsible, Many companies, many entities will say, well, we have our data, just try and get it. And if you got that data set, try and aggregate it with anybody else's that may be similar.
That's right.
That's where the magic is, in the larger denominator, when you can pick up those small signals. Open access, true sharing is where the magic begins.
And it's small details that make a difference.
Absolutely.
And therefore, you cannot just have a registry with some aggregated data. You have to look at the details.
Exactly.
And it calls for standardization, doesn't it? Standardization
point-
of terms.
Data standards.
Yes.
People need to be able to measure the same thing.
We only spent 4 years just developing that. But the final, not my final point, I'm Irish, there's never a final point, but at least this penultimate point is the following. What about outcomes? Project Datasphere 20 months ago had 0 data sets, not a single patient. It now has more than 65,000 patient lives, over 100 cancer clinical trials, which are registration quality. Wonderful. There are over 7,000 individuals that have already accessed Project Datasphere, working within it and using its analytical tools graciously provided by SAS. But the most important thing is there are already 9 peer-accepted publications in the last 14 months in journals like Lancet Oncology, Nature, PLOS One, etc., that have discovered new information that's not only relevant to your next clinical trial or your patient, it's actually available now for introduction. So the outcomes of these analyses is already documented, and it's burgeoning if you actually have quality data that's responsibly held and that's aggregatable. Did that sound like a sale for Project Datasphere?
Yes.
.org.
Yes.
ProjectDatasphere.org.
Very good. Now, from the advertising break, can I come here? Yes. Respond to me, Victor, just on that specific point about standards, because I think that's, again, if we're talking about accessibility and access to as many people, that common standards is such an important point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you said it all. I mean, I think people are measuring things, they're defining what they measure differently, they use different technology, and they're not interoperable. So until you can actually set common standards, you can share the data effectively.
And that has to be global.
Has to be global.
And how do we do that? This is the World Economic Forum, ladies and gentlemen.
Convergence.
Yes.
We talked earlier about convergence. I think that there's going to be an effort where World Economic Forum and other parties will come together in order to discuss and influence how we create a standardized data structure for healthcare.
But
So I
there
don't
are
know who's
already
listening from World
standards.
Economic
So
Forum.
let's. So we have HL7, we have now Fire and Smart on Fire. What we need to add to it.
Explain to the people who don't know what that might mean.
These are standards for observation, so that you can standardize the way you look at blood pressure. There's a whole. So it's widely used. Everybody's using it. So maybe it's not complete, so you can extend it. I think what we also need is standards for, contextual behavioral data. So I think clinical data is not enough. And I think we need a way to codify care plans, because that's not standardized as well. So there are a couple of areas where we can extend it. We don't need to invent the wheel here. I think we need to extend. But it's about interfaces. So I think ultimately it is about bringing the information together in a way that we can look at it. Still, we have 123 billion images that are annotated, and a radiology report is next to it. It's not quantified. It's just observations. I recently did a full checkup. I get a 10-page document at the end of it, and it says, we hope to see you next year, because hope. But I said, okay, this is not actionable for me. This is not something I can aggregate and compare with something else. But that's the state of healthcare. So maybe we should start using the standards. We should start applying the standards in the way we aggregate data, and we don't need to start from scratch.
But that's where convergence comes to play, right? And it can't be only on the basic health information. It needs to move to multi-omics, proteomics, genomics, metabolomics. How do we start to aggregate, converge, and use standards across the data sets?
But Vivian, is this helpful to you? I mean, for instance, if you have a standardization of behavioral aspects of health, then does it help patients to show where they are because there's a very great push from people wanting to be like the norm. And if you're seen to be deviating away from the norm and that your behavior is not healthy, that helps people understand where they are.
You know, we pick it up a little differently. We have the electronic medical record, and it's a full record. We have inpatient, outpatient, pharmacy, lab, radiology. We have increasingly genetic information. We also have tissue bank to go along with it. What we've actually been doing a lot of work around is collecting information about social determinants of health. Yeah. What is somebody's sort of context in which health happens? That actually we think needs to be, you know, we talk about standards. Yeah. There's a lot of work that needs to be, because we talk a lot about precision medicine is going to bring the insight and the content. At the end of the day, you still have to turn around to somebody and convince them to do something different. Most of it is lifestyle driven, and you actually have to have information that engages the member and patient in those ways. And social determinants start getting to the issue. It also helps address some of your issues around differences in disparities, because clearly there are cultural differences. And then we have to be very thoughtful about what is that individual patient's preference. So we started collecting information about consumer preferences, how they like to use the information, when information should be shared. It's so clear that there are many different segments. We actually don't collect any genetic information below the age of 13 because it gets really complicated for kids. We have to use the information we know about how, you know, our patients and their preferences. So we think this is an evolving conversation. We do have to go towards standards. We got to also find a way to bring all these pieces of information together because there's just going to be so much information about a single person. And family history, we started collecting family history in a very consistent way.
And actually, where there's a clear evidence at the moment that there isn't a benefit of precision medicine is that if you tell somebody that they've, and I assure you all that there isn't such a thing, but if you tell someone that they have an eating all the pies gene, people imagine that it will stop them eating all the pies. But in fact, they carry on eating pies because if you've got an eating all the pies gene, why not? You might well carry on.
More important, what Vivian's saying, which I totally endorse, is you try and not only measure the behavior issues, but the socioeconomic issues. These are big determinants of health outcomes. I think if you see anything in our country, the disparity had to do with socioeconomic issues. So she lives in an advanced health system which is measuring all this stuff, but not everybody is, and that's why I say standards are not there. She has her own electronic health system. Most others buy Epic or Cerner, and I just talked to Judith Faulkner, who's the CEO of Epic. She's now including social determinants. But what she's measuring may be different from what you're measuring. So there's still a lot to standardize, right? Yeah. And I think these are important issues to recognize.
So we'll take one more question here. It'll have to be brief, sir.
Well, I'm just concerned that we're never going to get to the point, because of these uncertainties, where precision medicine is going to be that precision. As an engineer, if I specify a screw type, I know it's not going to fit another size. But if you tell me I have a disease that's likely to be fatal and the medication is going to work 70% of the time, you're going to not give it to somebody for whom it might work 30% of the time? How can we get to the point where we know the prediction is enough that people will be willing to forego a treatment without knowing whether it's going to work or not? And I don't think we've gotten to that point. There are a few examples where we have that, but most of the time it's just changing the odds. It's not really saying this positive predictive value is so great that you should get it, or it's so strong that you shouldn't.
Yeah. It's a very, that's a very important point. And Callie, I'm going to come to you for a very brief answer to that, because actually there is going to be an issue with a very expensive drug. If people perceive it to be very effective, and, you know, yes, my tests have not shown that it's going to work for me, but I might well come along and say, well, what do you doctors know?
That's right.
Well, this is what all precision medicine is about, to be able to predict much better than now who will benefit from which drug for a certain disease.
But it's not absolutely increase the odds.
I think, Jeff, it's towards precision medicine. That's what our report called. Towards precision medicine. I think it's probably more predictive medicine than precision medicine, right? Yeah. And the question is, what's your probability, and where would you actually make that decision?
Yeah, we want to get a higher probability of success.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so very quick, almost one-line thought from each of you as to where we need to go next, particularly with affordability and accessibility. Can I start with you, very quickly?
We have to do better in terms of cooperation. We have to share data, otherwise precision medicine will be very difficult.
Gianluca.
We need to be very targeted on what we're trying to solve, understanding that is an improvement, is not a permanent, definitive solution, and focus on value-based care that consider outcome and cost, not only the cost aspect of it.
Yeah, I want to start with that as well. I think move towards value-based care is mandatory for this, and that allows us then to better risk stratify and better find the therapies that fit both with those outcomes and the personal needs of a person.
I can't disagree with value-based care, but I will have to say, I think it's precision medicine and also contextual care. That is context-specific to that individual's situation.
I can think of 4 things, if I may. Evidence. How do you generate evidence, and what's sufficient evidence? We talk about randomized controlled trial versus big data. Second is cost effectiveness. You know, as you think about getting into market, how do you value it's better than what you have and it's cost effective? Third is data sharing and patient engagement. And fourth is, of course, we didn't talk about how to make doctors and nurses and the workforce being able to use this effectively, integrate into clinical practice.
Well, I think to sum up, certainly it's a technology that we can make accessible and we should make affordable. I think, and I hope that you're all listening from the World Economic Forum, I think that there is a huge amount of work to do on standardization. I think that actually the World Economic Forum could be the ring holder that enables a global set of standards for data sharing. And that's something that we have to solve in order that we get the trust of the entire populations in our countries in these new technologies which promise and which could deliver so much. So thank you all to our very splendid panel, and thank you to the audience.